So let me introduce, while we're talking about agency agreements, a very unique one, folks. And for whatever reason, this one has a very odd name. Okay. It is called, for test taking purposes, the protection agreement. And I can promise you, you're going to try to confuse that with the protection period. And you can't do that. They're different. This is not the same thing. Okay, remember the protection period, aka extender clause, aka tail clause, said that on the back end of your agency agreement terminating, you may still be entitled to compensation. That's not what this is. So let me explain the protection agreement. The legal name of the document is called the Unrepresented Seller Disclosure and Fee Agreement. If I've got it pulled up, I'll show it to you real quick. But for whatever reason, they test it as the protection agreement. I don't know why. I mean, I do know why, but it's just, that's not the legal name of it. Let me see if it's on here. I'll find a copy and show it to you. But let me explain what this does, folks. Do you think that there are times where you are representing a buyer client and that buyer ends up being interested in a for sale by owner? You think that happens? Sure it does. And so what is going to be the biggest question that we're probably going to ask as a buyer's agent when we reach out to the seller to schedule that showing? Yeah, commission. Are you willing to compensate us, folks? And understand, in the for sale by owner world, there is multiple different types of for sale by owner. Some of them are always going to say no. Some of them are more than willing to compensate you, and some of them are willing to compensate you some, but not what you would probably expect to be compensated. There is no one size fits all. And so it's called a protection agreement for two reasons. Okay. If you are a buyer's agent and you're reaching out to the seller, let's make this a double faceted learning point. First and foremost, if you're a buyer's agent reaching out to the seller, what's the first thing you have to do? Tara, I'm not that good at reading lips. Disclose. What was the language we used for this disclosure that I'm referring to? What was the language? Say hey. Not wrong there. Yeah, there you go, Bridge. Initial contact. Remember, when we're dealing with the working with real estate agents disclosure, it's only required in all sales transactions, both residential and commercial. And the trigger for the disclosure is typically first substantial contact, which means if the conversation starts going to confidential territory. But if you are a buyer's agent already talking to a seller or a seller's agent, it's initial contact that you have to disclose your agency status. So if you're a buyer's agent reaching out to a for sale by owner, you would have to disclose your agency status at initial contact. And then you would ask them if they're willing to pay you a compensation. And if they say yes, folks, are you going to rely on a handshake to ensure you get paid? No. And that's what this protection agreement does. It does two things. It protects you and it protects them. So you send them this form and it says, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, as a reminder, I don't represent you. I represent the buyer. I'm not looking after your best interest. Just be aware of that. And number two, you have agreed to compensate me X amount and you are going to sign this document. So that's the protection agreement. It is used in conjunction with a for sale by owner to remind them that they're not represented and that they are agreeing to pay us a compensation for bringing them a buyer and assisting and facilitating the transaction. What you got, Bill?
So how much effort or work as far as dealing with managing inspections and that kind of stuff? What's the expectation if you're just representing the buyer, but you're getting a commission?
Honestly, it almost ends up being double the work because your job is to protect your buyer, but the seller typically doesn't have a freaking clue what to do. And so if you want the transaction to move forward, you've got to basically hold the seller's hand too and tell them, here's what's next, here's what's next, here's what's next. And so that's why you have to clarify that I don't represent you, even though I may be facilitating getting this to closing because you don't have a clue what's going on. It does end up being a lot more work. Yeah. Now, one other thing to be aware of, folks, the listing agreement that I showed you a moment ago, the exclusive right to sell listing agreement, that is what we would call a full service listing agreement. Okay, full service listing agreement. Basically, it means that we are going to do everything and anything on behalf of our clients in the scope of the law to help facilitate the sale. But there is something called a limited service listing agreement. There are some brokers who operate their business this way. And emphasis on the word limited service. It is a type of agency agreement where they're limiting the services that they are offering to you. Key point though, while they may limit the services they're offering, they are not allowed to limit their duties under law and rule. Meaning they would still have an obligation to disclose material facts. They would still have an obligation presenting offers. There's certain legal things that they'd still have duties to do. But the most common approach is what we call an a la carte style approach, where you may state to a seller, hey, for $500, I'll put your house in the MLS. For $200, I'll measure it. For, $150, I'll give you the paperwork you need. For $600, I'll advise you on, what you should do for negotiations. Typically, the a la carte option is the most common. I'm just going to do certain things for you, not everything for you. Now, one other word of caution here. A lot of people in the general public like to call these folks discount brokers. We're not really allowed to call them discount brokers because discount implies there's a fixed price. Bill says, is compensation up front? Yes. So they would pay per service. That's exactly right. Kind of cafeteria style, if you will. So they may limit their services, but they cannot limit their legal duties or obligations there. Let me ask you another question before we move on to the buyer side of things and some of the other items. Take a look at this. Tell me what you think. Yeah, so smart. True or false? A seller is moving to Alaska and will not be back to North Carolina once they move in 3 weeks. Therefore, they would like to sign an exclusive right to sell listing agreement with Go Realty that does not terminate until the house is sold. This is allowable under these circumstances. Folks, that would be false because, as you all pointed out in the chat, it has to have a definite termination date. You cannot say until it sells. You could put it for 2 years. You could put it for 1 year. You could put it for 8 months, hoping that that'd be enough time. And you can always amend it, but it still has to have a definite termination date. That is a requirement. Okay. You cannot have an open-ended agreement. So that would be a problem there. Now, this goes back to what I was stating earlier, too. You got to be very careful about questions asking about the different things that are on the listing agreement. Super oddly specific things like square footage of the property, bedrooms and bathrooms, things like that are not going to be on the listing agreement. That's in our marketing stuff, but that's not on the listing agreement. So just don't get caught up on that on the test, because there are a couple questions that have a tendency to confuse students with that. You got to think that sometimes we're figuring out this stuff at the same time as we're filling out this listing agreement, so it's not going to be in there. And then, of course, we've already stated this too. These documents can be amended, right? We're going to talk about amendments in the contract section, pretty shortly. But any legal document can be amended, which is a fancy word for changed. And so if a seller does not authorize dual agency initially, they could change it. And then, of course, we need, consent of all the parties for dual agency. So both the buyer and the seller would have to consent to dual agency. It can't just be one or the other in order to represent both in the same transaction. couple other supplemental notes on listing agreements, and then we're going to get into your favorite thing, math, to wrap up the night. Yay, you. This top bullet point on this slide right here says compensation is always outlined in the listing agreement, never in the sales contract. In other words, we talk about the money we expect to make as real estate brokers in our agency contracts because those are employment agreements. Why is it never in a sales contract? Because we have a rule on sales contracts in North Carolina, and it states that a real estate broker in North Carolina can use any pre-printed sales contract so long as it contains 19 required provisions and so long as it does not contain 2 prohibited provisions. And one of the prohibited provisions is discussion of brokerage compensation. Folks, we're not a party to the sales contract. So why would we be talking about our money on a contract between the buyer and seller? Now, I will tell you that other states have different laws than us in that regard, and that makes their lives so much easier with the NAR crap, but that's neither here nor there. So we talk about how much we intend to make, what we're going to charge, so on and so forth on our agency contracts, not the sales contract. And of course, when we're dealing with a listing agent, we have earned our commission when we have procured a ready, willing, and able buyer at terms acceptable to the seller. Be very cautious though, folks, because if you get a test question that says a listing agent received an offer on the property, have we earned our commission? No. Any offer is not earning our commission. What if it's $1? What if it's $50,000 less than list price, right? It has to be at terms acceptable to the seller. Not any offer. It has to be an offer at terms acceptable to the seller. So let's talk about the math side of commissions really quick, folks. And I would argue that the math itself is some of the easiest math in this class, but the questions are not going to be. Let me explain. This is just percentages. We've been dealing with percentages, and percentages are not that hard from a mathematical point of view. The thing that gets confusing is these are almost always word problems, and there's a lot going on, and you have to be able to dissect it and break it apart. And I'll show you what I mean here in just a second. The easiest way to look at this, though, is what we call a commission tree. And so if you look at this example, I'm multitasking here so I can show you the next one. All the math is outlined for you on here, but let me show you what we're dealing with. Okay, let's just start at the top. If we had a sales price of $189,000 and the gross commission was 6%, and that's just multiply it by 6%. Remember, convert it to 0.06 or let the calculator do it for you. So times 0.06. 6% would be a gross commission of $11,340, as you see here. And then what it goes on to say is that the listing firm and the selling, there's that word selling that I told you you would see. But I told you it's not really consequential on the commission math. Why? Because we don't care who represents who. It's just a math question, right? Just do the math. And so what we're saying is of this gross commission, the listing firm gets 60% of it, and the selling firm gets 40% of it. So yet again, we're just dealing with percentages, but it's percentages of the commission. Do not ever do like 60% of the sales price, folks. This is where math will help you out. If your commission was like $120,000 on a $200,000 house, you did something wrong. So of your gross commission, the listing firm is getting 60%, which is $6,804. And the selling firm is getting everything else, or you could say 11,340 times 40%. And I'll show you why we call this the commission tree, is how we typically teach it. Because if you break it down into this tree, if you add up these two, it should equal this. And if it doesn't, you did something wrong. And it actually goes even further. So what typically happens in this math, it will say something like, okay, well, this is how much went to the listing firm, but then the individual licensee had an 80-20 split. And this is how it really works in the real world, folks. So when I say an 80-20 split, that means of the gross commission that came to your firm, that first number is how much you keep as a licensee. The second number is how much your firm keeps. And so in this example that I just gave with an 80-20 split, all right, we're going to break it apart again. 80% of this is going to the agent. 20% of this is going to the firm. So 6,804 times 80% would be 5,443.20. And then the firm kept everything else. In other words, 6,804 times 20%, which would be 1,360.80. So if you had a test question like this and it said, what was the listing licensee's split given all these details? The answer would be this number right here. Does this make sense? It's just percentages. So let me show you what it looks like when it gets slightly more complex. Because the math isn't hard. It's keeping the names straight and dissecting the word problem that students have a tendency to struggle with. So I'm going to pull up that math packet that we worked in several different times, and I'm going to give you a couple examples to try here. There we go. So here's the math packet. Hopefully you have all been playing around with it and having a blasty blast and a half with it. I told you it's broken down into categories. So let's find commission math. Here we go. So let's just start with a pretty straightforward one. Right here, number 1. Work that out for me. Give me just another moment and we'll go over it. Got a smattering of answers, if you will. Also, full disclosure, I don't know if y'all have heard me humming it. The Ninja Turtles theme song is stuck in my head, and it is entirely Raphael's fault. Yeah. Mm-hmm. There you go. Just wanted you to know that, Raphael. Because as soon as I was talking to you earlier, I'm like, that's the name of a Ninja Turtle. And then my brain just went down a rabbit hole. I'm like, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle. And it's just been in my head for the past 30, 40 minutes, Raphael. It is what it is. There you go. That's right. Turtles in a half shell. Yeah, there you go. You know it. Folks, let's talk about this, okay? I told you, the math is not hard. It's keeping the information straight is the hard part. So a house sells for $200,000 at 6% commission. There's a 50-50 split between the listing firm and the selling firm. The listing agent has a 50-50 split with his firm, and the selling agent has a 60-40 split with his firm. How much would each agent make? Let's just take it a piece at a time. First and foremost, let's start with the gross commission. $200,000 times 6%. Gross commission is $12,000 up at the top. Of that gross commission, there's a 50-50 split between the listing firm and the selling firm. And so divide it by 2, multiply it by 50%, whatever makes you feel warm and fuzzy inside, you do you, boo-boo. So when I break it apart, we've got the listing firm getting $6,000. We've got the selling firm. And once again, we don't care about loyalties, just whoever the heck brought the buyer as the selling firm. But then it goes on even further. And so then the listing agent has a 50-50 split with his firm. So that means of the $6,000 that's coming into the firm, the listing agent gets $3,000. And the listing firm also keeps $3,000. But then the selling agent has a 60-40 split, which means 60% goes here, 40% goes here. So of the $6,000 that's going to the selling firm, 60% goes to the licensee, which is $3,600. Now, we can finish this and say, what, $2,400 over here. But the question is, how much will each agent? And in these commission questions, it means the licensee. It's not trying to trick you. It's not the firm. It's none of that. In the commission questions, it wants to know how much the licensee is making. $3,000 for the listing agent, $3,600 for the selling agent. How are we feeling? What you got, Parker?
So we have to assume that the first number in the split is the agent.
You don't have to assume. I told you that just moments ago. That first number is always the agent.
Sorry, I missed that.
Yep, no worries. The first number is always the agent. So, I mean, if it was like a 20-80, that means the agent is getting 20, the firm is getting 80. 50-50 obviously doesn't matter. If it's 90-10, that means the agent is getting 90, the firm is getting 10. That first number is always the licensee. Of course, the added complexity piece, though, folks, is when you have to reverse engineer the problems. Just like every other math we've done, sometimes we ask you to kind of solve it backwards. We'll tell you something, and then you've got to get back to where it started. And so this is a prime example of this. Selling agent made $5,000 on a sale with a 50-50 split with their company. The listing company agreed to pay 4% commission to the selling firm. What would the sales price be? And so there's a couple different ways that you can tackle this, but this goes back to that algebra. You've got this missing variable, and you've got to figure out what the sales price is. Some of you are overachievers. I didn't even tell you to do this one yet. I'm going to skip it now just to prove a point. You know, tell me what's next. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, y'all go ahead and do it. And if you have no clue how to tackle this, don't feel bad. I'll explain it, but give it a shot. Really, Chelsea, I didn't notice. Yeah, I like the math too. I like this kind of math. Like if you say the word trigonometry, I will flip a table. Okay, I'm out on that. But this math, I'm cool with. Calculus also out. Pass.
Seth, just a question. What's the agreements between broker and firm in terms of commission?
Adult diapers. If you're actually curious, folks, it's a really cool time to be alive as a real estate broker because there's like 10,000 different business models. There are firms that will give you 100% of your commissions and just charge you transaction fees. There are firms that will charge you a 50-50 split. And so the question is always, what's your split versus what do they provide to you? And it's not all about the number, because what you need more than anything when you're new is training. And the number, you can renegotiate your split at any time. So it really just depends. There's a lot of different models. I would say that the average is probably like for new agents, 70-30. Yeah. So a couple of you are still working on this. But there's really more than one way that you can calculate this. You could, in theory, go in and plug in, right? Unknown sales price times 4% equals whatever divided by whatever. But you could also just kind of start taking it a certain way. So if the selling agent made $5,000 on a 50-50 split with her company, well, that means she made half of what the company made, which means the company made $10,000. And so now that you know what the company made, they were paid 4%. So in other words, this unknown price times 4% equals $10,000. Divide by 0.04 on this side. Divide by 0.04 on this side. And that kind of negates it. So the price is $10,000 divided by 0.04 or $250,000. We'll give you one more here. And as I said, is there going to be a whole lot of commission math? No. But, it is very easy to get it wrong if you're not paying attention and depending on the way they do it. Do this one. Multiple choice. Give you just another moment. So, you're still working, that's okay. I'm going to start working through it. Folks, it is very important when you are doing any question, including the math, that you read through it and make sure you fully understand the question, right? What are you actually answering? And so John, an agent with West Coast Realty, lists a home for $370. Sam, an agent with East Coast Realty, has a buyer for the property and they go under contract for $350 with a 6% commission. They co-broke. The co-broke split is 50-50. John has a 55-45 split with West Coast, and Sam has a 62-38 split with East Coast Realty. How much will Sam make in commission once the property closes? Okay, well, that means we want to know how much Sam is making. We do not care about how much John is making. So Sam is an agent with East Coast Realty, has a buyer for the property, and they go under contract for $350 with a 6% commission. Co-broke split is 50-50. Let's start there. You've got to know that this list price doesn't matter. We get commission based on what the property sold for. And so of the sales price of $350 times your 6% commission, that is a gross commission of $21,000. And then we already said the co-broke split, meaning the listing firm gets 50%, the selling firm gets 50%. And so 21,000 divided by 2 is your 10,500. Now, really and truthfully, I'll put the listing firm over here. I'll put the selling firm over here. But I really just need to focus on where is Sam. So 10,500. 10,500. And so Sam is an agent, has the buyer. So he's the selling firm. So of the selling firm, John is a listing agent. We're not worried about his split. And Sam has a split of 62-38. So that means of this 10,500, he gets 62% of it. 10,500 times 0.62, 6,510. We don't really need to do the rest of the math, but the reason this tree is so helpful is you can add it all back up to make sure it didn't mess up anywhere, because this plus this should equal that, this plus this should equal that, so on and so forth. But once we found that Sam was the person we needed to focus on, we can just break it apart. How are we feeling? Anthony, was that a good face or a bad face? Inquiring minds need to know.
See, what happened was I
Mm-hmm.
had all of that from the math question. It was the part when I was getting to his split part that got me. So that was the part that I had got stuck at after I got the 10,500.
Yeah, and remember what I told you. The math isn't hard. It's keeping the word problem straight that's hard, right? You've got to make sure. Yeah, I've taught this once or twice.
Got me, yes.
So it's important to just practice it because there is so many different facets. I will just introduce. I'm not going to make you do it, and I don't know that I have one in this math packet, but I'll tell you the other math that I've heard of them doing commission, and I think there might be one on my test. It's what we call a multiple commission rate math problem. And I'll just give you a quick example. This is not uncommon in commercial. And so you may have something along the lines of, well, if you sell this property, up to $3 million, we'll pay you 6% commission. Anything between $3 million and $5 million, oops, that's a weird M, will give you 7% commission. And then anything greater than 5 million or 5 million plus, I'm brain is whatever. 5 million, anything above 5 million will give you 10% commission. And so then if they go on to say, well, the property sold for, $7 million, this is multiple commission rates. And so what you're going to do is you're going to calculate 6% on the first 3 million. So that would be 3 million times 6%, which is 180,000. And then don't double dip. 7% is off everything between 3 and 5. There is 2 million between 3 and 5. So 2 million, would really be great if that was right there. 2 million times 7% would be 140,000. And then everything in excess of 5 million is at 10%. Well, yet again, it's 7 million, so that is another 2 million above 5. So 2 million times 10% for $200,000. And so if you sold this commercial building for $7 million and that was your negotiated split, your total commission would be 200,000 plus 140,000 plus 180,000 for a total commission of $520,000. By the way, if you get into commercial, this is not unrealistic. It's very hard to get into that size deals though, but it is something that I bet everybody is more than excited for that. A buddy of mine is started dabbling in commercial recently, and he just got a deal under contract. It was a commercial lease, and he's going to make $120,000 off of it. Just one deal. Just going to be like split into 2 payments. It's, I think, like 60,000 and 60,000, 65 and 65, whatever it comes out to. Not a bad payday. Yeah. Folks, what do you want to talk about for the last 7 minutes? Oh, sorry, Shannon. Saw your hand.
So does commission get taxed similarly, like a large commission get taxed similarly as bonuses, like where it's like 40%?
Here's the problem with the real estate world. They give you everything you're entitled to. You're an independent contractor, so you are responsible for withholding your own taxes, for paying the government either in quarterly payments or, whatever your CPA or tax advisor you thinks you should do. So, let's say that, you were actually grossing $520,000. You're going to get a check for all $520,000, and you've got to know how much of that to set aside to pay your taxes.
That's what I was going to say. You better set aside a fat stack.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to have a lot of deductions too, because, getting a $520,000 commission check probably costs you a lot of money in marketing and other stuff that's deductible, but it's still going to be a fat stack. For sure. Good question. What else, folks? Is that a plug, Anthony, or you just advertising that? You know somebody, right? Like, I got you. Right? I can call my person. I'm going to pass out business cards for them. You getting a referral fee on this? I don't know how the laws work with it, tax people. I don't know that.
I'll ask one more. How common is property management and commercial leasing?
How common is property management and commercial leasing? It's pretty common. Because commercial leases are probably more common than commercial purchases. And so, somebody has to manage it to make sure that they're paying and, of course, deal with upkeep. I mean, it really depends on the commercial type of property, restaurants versus medical parks versus agricultural versus it's really going to depend. But, property management in commercial is very common. That is one of the big facets of commercial. Bill says tax as a W-2 without the employer contribution. No, there's no W-2. It's 1099. So you are considered self-employed. And so there is the second part is right. There is no employer contribution. There is no employment withholdings. There is no Social Security. There is none of that. You're responsible for all of that because your employer doesn't do any of it.